Good evening. Welcome back. Welcome back to Satan and Judaism, and here at Or Shalom. Tonight is Thursday night, April 3rd, 2025, and we just had a conversation and agreed that this is too much fun. Satan brings us too much joy, and so we are going to continue. And rather than fighting to catch up to where we were going to be, we're going to give ourselves a little bit of time and space to do a little bit more tech study on Satan. As a reminder for everybody, all of the materials and the past classes can be found on the Or Shalom website. If you go to www.orshalom.org and click on education, and at the bottom, Satan and Judaism with Rabbi Meltzer, if you click on that, it will pull up this relatively uninspiring but convenient page that has the source sheet and the recording from the first session, session 1. That was the Satan of Job, or the Satan in the Tanakh. And session 2, which again, source sheet and recording, that had to do with the Satan in Job. I'm sorry, the first one was Satan as a verb and as an adjective and a place name. The second one was Satan in Job. Third one last time was Satan in the Talmud, of which we only got through part of it. And then tonight we are scheduled to do Satan in the Midrash. And if you click here, it'll pull up the new handout. I am overwhelmed by the amount of material that is present in Satan, about Satan in Midrashic texts. But before we get there, at the end of the last class, I tried to do a quick stuff it down your throat highlights of Satan in the Talmud, and I didn't get through it, and it was a bad idea. And so we're going to go back and enjoy some of those Satan in the Talmud texts, and that will still leave time tonight. I'd like to be done closer to 8:30 than 9 o'clock, but no promises. That'll still leave time tonight to get into Satan in the Midrash. And what I would love is, since we have a month till the next class, is people should read through the texts of Satan in the Midrash, both of whatever we get to tonight and whatever we don't get to, so we can do even more discussion on in the next class about that material. So if that makes sense, please tell me that that makes sense. I'm going to, again, everybody should be able to open up this text on their computer or this handout on their computer. And so I don't really need to share it, but I'm going to share it anyway, because I think it works easier, at least for some people. As a reminder, what I've been trying to argue, by the time we get out of Job, Satan comes, and even in Job, but it's fuller, richer in the Talmudic texts. Satan becomes a variable or a narrative element that allows for a whole variety of problems, or allows to ameliorate for a whole variety of problems. You know, some of the dirt and muck in this world that would otherwise be on God's metaphorical hands, Satan becomes the excuse for it. It's not God's fault. And that's, a theological problem as to how much freedom does God grant to Satan? Is Satan autonomous? Is all kinds of problems that won't fully be dealt with in our tradition, because Satan never plays a central role. Okay, those are somebody else's headache when you make Satan super important. But Satan becomes a storytelling possibility. And I deeply believe that our tradition is a tradition of storytellers. And the stories have a narrative influence. That is, they teach us about the world, the nature of the stories, but they're not a physics class. They're not teaching us, some fundamental truth about the world. They're giving us an understanding to help us navigate a world that's complicated, at times painful, unpredictable, even capricious, which is a great Satan word. And we'll see if we can come back there. So hopefully that sounds somewhat familiar in terms of where we have been. If I look at how far I think we got to in the last class. If you turn ahead to text number 7 on the bottom of page 4, which I don't know why those are two lowercase i's rather than two uppercase i's. No reason not to edit as we go. We get this introduction of Satan as tempting, Satan as somehow arousing sexual desire in the story of Rabbi Meir, with Satan appearing on the other side of the river, compelling Rabbi Meir to cross the river, and Rabbi Meir gets his wits about him and is able to resist the lure of it. And again, I think a pedagogic text told about a sage of how we resist temptation. The temptation is real. Even the great sages see something that they're not supposed to, I like pork chops rather than sexual desire being my example, but things you're not supposed to have, like that beautiful woman on the other shore. She's supposed to be unattainable, right? You're not supposed to access her. It is objectifying, it is misogynistic, it is, speaking to male depravity, right? The whole statement that nobility is about males overcoming their depravity, rather than the statement that men really shouldn't be depraved in the first place, is an important contemporary critique of the rabbinic world. I hope that makes sense. This whole worldview that says men are susceptible to inappropriate sexual desire, and it's not the only thing that the woman, who's not really a woman, she's actually Satan, the only thing she's doing is standing there. She's not doing some kind of, arousing dance. There's no pole dance going on. She's not stripping. She's not, just the presence of woman is seen as sexually tempting or alluring in the rabbinic world. And I think that should be problematic to us. But the story itself is an archetype or a motif. Again, everybody should go find a folklore class online or in one of the community colleges. But we have the exact same story then about Rabbi Akiva. Even again, it's not exactly the same. For some reason, Satan decided to appear as a woman in a tree rather than on the other shore. But it's the same story, and it speaks to all of the same pieces. From Sanhedrin, we get Satan put into the great lust story of the Tanakh, the story of David seeing naked Bathsheba and saying, "Yeah, Lynn." Oh,
Rabbi, that's today's reading in Daf Yomi.
Kiddushin 81.
Sanhedrin.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Sanhedrin in the Babylonian Talmud 107a. 107a. I read it this morning.
Very nice. See, that's the way the world works. This is what becomes a theological problem. If you believe that's the way the world works, on days like today, you celebrate it. But on every other day, you think, wait, I'm missing something. It didn't work right. What's the problem? Right? But that's pretty cool. There is, I like the use of arrow in the story. Here the arrow is that there's a beehive disrupting David's view. And Satan appears as a bird. And when David shoots at the bird, Satan, he moves away and it dislocates the beehive. And that's what exposes Bathsheba to David's eyes. So, it's kind of fun because it's a different here. In the case of Rabbi Meir and the Rabbi Akiva stories, Satan becomes the object of desire. He literally, says, I am the beautiful woman and I will tempt you into sin. It's kind of neat in the David and Bathsheba story that Satan just gets changes David's view, right? He tempts David to loose an arrow, which causes the beehive to move aside, which then allows David to see Bathsheba. But Satan himself is not part of the actual tempting. Yeah? Do you see that Satan is kind of a secondary source? Bathsheba is the temptation. Okay? It's not Satan dressed up like a naked woman in a bathtub. And I think that's really interesting. I think that's a different model of Satan than the Akiva and Rabbi Meir story. Again, I'm going to go pretty quickly through the pages, most of them, in the Talmudic text, but I'm happy to stop and read any of them completely or more slowly. But I do want to get through this and at least start the Midrashic text. So if I'm going too fast, or if I'm not making sense, or if you have questions, stop me. In my fantasy world, we are in person and we have, a block of 3 or 4 hours so that I could do a little introduction. We would break off in pairs and you would actually read these 8 stories, and then, or some of them, and then we would come back and really have a fuller discussion about them. Okay. So I have yet to fully enter into my fantasy world, but it's there. So if you have questions, if I'm going too fast, or if you have comments to share, just interrupt me. You can raise your hand if you think I'll see it on Zoom, but you can also just interrupt me and say, excuse me. So the motif of Satan is a beautiful woman getting somebody to do something dangerous, climbing a tree or crossing the river, trying to do something or climbing a ladder, we saw that last week, trying to get something that they're not supposed to have, right? These are married men who have wives, and they're not supposed to have the beautiful woman in the top of the tree. Notice, by the way, there are all of these connections. What story does something forbidden to you in the top of the tree bring to mind?
Adam and Eve.
Yeah. How so?
The snake was the temptation to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge.
Exactly. Right. And so the role that the snake plays in terms of his interaction or its interaction with the woman, here you have the woman is actually the fruit. Right now, she's not hanging from a branch, but she is the fruit that is the temptation. She is Satan, right? Satan becomes the woman in the tree. The Rabbi Akiva story actually has a whole lot of wonderful symbolism that's built into it. And I think the other stories do as well. I think that maybe the beehive, it's interesting that it's a beehive that's blocking the view. It's not just a branch of a tree would bring the story, but beehives being dangerous, being, you mess with a beehive, you get punished for your stupidity. It's just the natural course of things and so forth. Other thoughts? Okay. Now the arrow becomes a motif as well. And so we know, I don't think that in any of these texts, the arrow is like Eros or Cupid's arrow that pierces the heart to arouse desire. Okay, I haven't found that text yet in a classical Jewish source where the arrow is the vehicle or the medium that arouses lust. Okay, but the fact that a number of these texts have arrows in them makes me wonder if there's a cross-cultural moment that somehow the arrow is related to arousal, whether that harkens to the Greek. For the rabbis, it would be Roman presence of Cupid, or again, the whole idea of arrow and shooting, and it's awfully phallic. I don't think one doesn't need a cigar lying on a couch to be able to identify that it is a phallic image in terms of how it plays out in the story. Anybody else?
Well,
Also,
we also have David and Jonathan with the arrows.
Yeah.
Giving the message about when it's safe and not safe for David.
Yes, and so I'm not sure if you know this and it's implicit in your comment, or you're just even deeper than you're aware of. But the David Jonathan story has become, it has its own uh, history in classical texts about the beauty of their relationship, but it's become a homoerotic story in amongst many contemporary commentators in a positive way, as a positive example of homoerotic love within it. And so putting the arrow in that story, again, I don't know of a midrash that puts Satan into that story, but that arrow is a loving arrow or a romantic arrow, or a phallic arrow. There are a lot of contemporaries who see that or interpret the David Jonathan relationship in that way. And probably if it falls into other people's hands, they probably make it Satan as well. But I haven't seen those commentators destroy that lovely text yet. So the next one from the same page of the Talmud is this same page that we had before. The Kiddushin 81 is a great page of, a kind of an anthology of texts about Satan. Yeah, Lynn?
I wanted to remark that an arrow in the eye of Satan, I've seen it several times in the Talmud, that someone who's bragging about his control over himself, his control over his evil inclination, will use that phrase. I mean, I've seen it often. I think that must have been a common vernacular thing to say when you talked about how strong you were in controlling yourself. There's that arrow.
And how would you explain that idiom? Lynn, do you want to take a stab? I'll use a different sharp item.
Like turning your weapon, a weapon that would harm you, you turned it on Satan. You turned it on the source of the impulse, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, and I think on a functional level, it is a daring or a taunting of Satan. It's like begging him, I dare you to pay attention to me, or I'll force you to look at me. Right, which isn't, I'm not totally clear how shooting Satan in the face with an arrow does that, but I think as a literary idiom, that's what it says. I think, or that's what it connotes. It connotes like, ha ha, Satan, look at me, man. Right? It's sort of like self-spotlighting, so Satan sees you. Might be a way that we would explain it, but I think the Talmudic idiom is about taunting Satan because there's a inverse to it that we'll get to in a couple of texts later. That's not about the eye of Satan, but about your own mouth. And I do think it's really neat that it's about these basic senses, because a lot of the Satan stuff is sensual. It is about the senses in a sex sort of way. And the eye is seen as the sense or an organ that leads people astray, right? That's the third paragraph of the Shema from the book of Deuteronomy. V'lo taturu acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem, and don't get led astray by your eyes or by your heart. That's right. Look at the tzitzit, remember what you're supposed to do, rather than all those things that, for those who know squirrel. It's a great image of that, but it only works if you know the Pixar movie, Up. But for the easily distracted amongst us, it is easy for our eyes to be led astray. And, it's why racehorses, they put blinders on racehorses so they don't see the squirrel, so they don't get distracted. And tunnel vision is what they're supposed to have. And so again, it's about an arrow in the eye of Satan. It's not about controlling my own urges or lust, but I do think it's significant. I wouldn't overlook the issue of the senses, here, eyes, and a little bit we'll get to the mouth. I'm going to read this text, or mostly read this text in the way that I read, because it's really crazy. this guy named Polemo, and he would just say, I think some variant of Satan has no power over me, or I'm not tempted by Satan, or neener, 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 Satan, you got nothing on me, or some such, which is like begging attention for Satan. And one day, just before Yom Kippur, why is it significant? What's significant about Yom Kippur?
Judgment Day.
Judgment Day, right? If ever there was a day you don't want to foul up, you foul up 2 days before Yom Kippur, you at least have a window to fix it, right? So, but you foul up on Yom Kippur, whatever happened at Rosh Hashanah, you now have a bad mark next to your name in the book and very little time to clean it up. So Satan comes not as a woman, really neat. One of the things I love about this text is rather than playing the cheap wink wink nudge nudge ha 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 joke about depraved men, Satan comes as a beggar. And so here's a beggar right before Yom Kippur and knocks on the door of this person named Polemo. And Polemo brought him food, right? If ever there's a day that you don't want to be unsuccessful as a beggar, it's the day before a fast day. Like that would just be insult to injury. So Polemo brings him bread. But the beggar, Satan in disguise, isn't satisfied with it. And he said, I hear you're having a pre-fast meal in your house and everybody else is dining. What am I, like beggar chopped liver? You bring me out bread and everybody else is inside having a feast to get ready for it. So they invite him in, right? And they seat him at the table. And as he was sitting there, he brought on, his own disease, boils and pus. And he was, burping and belching and, making inappropriate comments. It's interesting that the boils and pus doesn't get commented on in the story. I think on some level, it just reinforces that this is somebody you don't want to be with. This is part of the untouchable class of beggars, the people we cross to the other side of the street because they're lying there and what else. But I also think it brings up a Jobin image. I couldn't prove it, but it does for me anyway, in terms of Job suffering. And so Polemo says to him, hey, you're in my house. Would you behave right? Cut it with the belching and farting at my table, or the lewd comments or the cat calls to my wife or whatever else. And then Satan says, pass me a cup. Here I am dining with you. When they give him a cup, he comes up with this nasty spit in it, in the cup. And they're upset. Now, it's reasonable to be upset. Like he's not behaving right at the table. And so Satan, as the beggar, drops dead. Right? Here they embarrass him, they berate him, and he drops dead. And all of a sudden, people start saying that Polemo is a murderer, right? Because he just, Erev Yom Kippur, he just killed this guy. Again, not by no knife wound, but by embarrassing him or by yelling at him. And so Polemo hides away. And so, Satan gets up and has a second death scene. Satan then has a moment of compassion and reveals himself as Satan and said, I bet you wished you hadn't taunted me before. Right? Like, I'm picking on you because you taunted me and said, like, I could withstand Satan. So, neener, you can't withstand Satan. You thought you could. And so, I love that Polemo has a conversation with him. So what should I say then? Right? And so Satan says, don't say that you can withstand Satan. Instead, offer a prayer that God should control Satan, right? Only God can do this, has the strength to set aside and whatever else Satan. You can't. So don't boast it. Pray that God will give you strength, or that's not the way it says it. It says that God will actually control the Satan. All right, I got a lot I want to say about this text, but before I do, anybody want to comment or share about Polemo, about this test that comes from the hand of Satan, or any piece of it?
This one seems interesting because it's like Satan's tempting him to almost do the right thing, not to transgress, to invite him into the house, to do more than that, to invite him to his table, to feed him. And he's being punished for that because of I guess, the attitude in the beginning where you can tempt me. I guess that seems unusual, whereas before it's always been Satan's manipulation in service of transgression rather than what we, I guess, call mitzvahs in this case. I'm not sure.
And I think that there's a real nobility to Polemo here, even though in the end, we'll talk about if we think he fails or not in his berating of the spitting, burping, farting Satan beggar. Um, but you get the sense that had Polemo seen a naked woman on the other side, or a beautiful woman on the other side of the river, he wouldn't have tried to cross it. Or at the top of a tree, he wouldn't have tried to climb it. Or if he saw, a naked woman bathing, he'd yell at her, get a room or get a shower curtain or a bathing suit, right? You get the sense that he really is of noble character. Somebody's hungry, he tries to feed them. The person is unsatisfied by it, and he says, "You're right, I should treat you in a dignified manner like every human being," right? Not like a beggar who gets beggar's crumbs, but especially on this day, I should treat you like a Baal Bait, like a member of my household. But then, if you're going to be a member of my household, I'd kind of like you to behave right. I have sympathy for that. There are people that you want to help, but what happens when you go to give them food and they literally bite the hand that feeds you? So nice. All right, other stuff. I This story, I think, had everything I've said so far. I agree. Uh, Davin's comments, I agree. There's a lot, but I want to just offer one other wrinkle to it, because I do think the struggle of helping somebody who makes it difficult to help them. On the one hand, there's a certain kind of chutzpahdik, when you give somebody something and they say, why are you giving me leftovers? Why don't you go back inside and order me a fresh sandwich instead of the quarter of the sandwich you didn't eat? So, okay, on the one hand, they have a claim to be treated with dignity. On the other hand, it's a bit chutzpahdik for them. Okay, but what happens when you invite them into the table and they have behaviors that you would accept from your friends, right? If I invited you to my house and you came up drunk and started vomiting in my dining room, I wouldn't let you stay in my dining room. I'd call you an Uber. I'd put you in my bedroom or my bathroom, more likely, right? But that's not behavior I would accept in my dining room from anybody. And so what's the limits, and how does that function for this guy who I think is right is Polemo? And then what does that mean for us in a world where, there are people that we care about who can't control their mental illness, or there are people who, because of their housing situations, smell bad. If one of you showed up at my house and really smelled bad, I'd ask you to go home and shower, or I'd invite you to shower. I don't know what I would do, but I wouldn't just accept it if you really, if you have dog poop on the soles of your shoes, I'm not going to let you bring your shoes in my house. And so, what are the limits of that? I think that there is a tension I'd like there to be a tension for us, in our world, in our experience, different than the literary context of the story of Polemo in Kiddushin. So, all right, good. But it's an example of, I think, the arrogance, maybe, of the person who would say, I am so in control of myself that Satan has no power over me, right? And again, that's why I sort of see like Palemo on his way home notices the lady up in the tree and says, "Hey, do you want me to help you down? Are you stuck? I can call the fire department or what?" Or sees the lady across the river, because that stuff doesn't hold sway over him. He really is a good guy. And this is a really unfair test to do it. And I like that Satan outs himself, right? I think that there's a piece of Satan as a compassionate character in this text that Satan actually says, "See, this is what happens. It took me a lot to get you to a place where where you ultimately don't take good care of me, but you shouldn't boast about it. You should instead pray to make sure that you're okay," or some version of that. Is good?
Mhm.
All right.
Rabbi, I couldn't see the very last.
Yeah, I noticed that. Sorry. The last piece is Palemo says, "All right, if I shouldn't say, I shoot an arrow in Satan's eye, what should I say?" And Satan says, "You know what's better? Rather than boasting about your strength to resist me, you should pray that God should take care of me, right? Rather than that you can handle me, you should pray that God will handle me," or something along those lines. Good, Steve?
Yeah,
I think Satan has a lot of respect for this fellow because he doesn't hurt him. He doesn't do something bad for him. He just embarrasses him and then teaches him a lesson. And Satan has enormous power, so he could have done all sorts of things, and he just sort of says, "Okay, that's your lesson." I think Palemu gets off pretty well.
Yeah, I think so. He could have just played dead till the end of the story, and poor Palemo would be in deep trouble, right? Or he could have, at the end, really said, "Palemo, you terrible idiot." But instead, it becomes a teachable moment, which is funny to say for Satan. Nicely said.
But
wonder-
also,
Go ahead.
Rabbi, I think Satan sees in Pelemo a real, honest, good person, maybe more than compared to the other examples you've cited. So that pushes him to, I don't know, a kind of respect, or he sees that he's an adversary, but he's such a good person. He's very competitive, let's say, with Satan.
Yeah, and that's
Because he's so good.
a neat image of Satan. That Satan who maybe has a chip on his shoulder about human beings, but has an admiration for the truly noble ones.
Right.
Yeah, like, all right, I'll give you. You did pretty well. You did pretty well, but you'll do better if you stop wanting to shoot an arrow in my eye. Don't do that. Nice. Thank you, Stella. Stephen, did you want to make another comment?
no.
You're good. Okay. You looked pensive. All right. The next couple of texts are actually, I think I thought I brought a couple of them. Or maybe only brought one of them. But there's a series having to do with the age at which a person, and here a person really means a man, again, the misogynistic blindness of now the rabbinic world is about when a person should marry. And Satan is a relevant part of that teaching. So if you look in the Talmud I think this is the last one, so I think the other ones are before it on 29a, but I'm not positive I'm right, but you'll find them, they're all there together. And so Rava says that the school of Rabbi Ishmael taught that up until the age of 20, God sits and waits for a man, says, "Okay, I'll be patient, this person's not ready." And God says, "When will they get married?" But then at the age of 20, if they still haven't married, God says this interesting expression, let his bones swell, which is not a good thing. And the interpretive comment there is from Rashi that God says, I'm done. I was patient with you. It didn't happen and I'm done. But up until 20, God gives a person time. You got a window of about 5 or 6 years in there to get it taken care of, and God will be patient. Rav Chisda said, I am, a boastful comment. I'm an impressive guy because I married at the age of 16. And if I married at 14, I could have boasted, that Satan has no sway over me. That even as a young adolescent, I could have controlled my libido and I would have been just fine. And, and then returning to Rava, the statement sort of to the dad saying, look, well, you still have control over your children. Don't trust that they can control their libido. Find them a wife. Get them married before they cause trouble. And so there's a discussion about what is that age. And again, with that expression, an arrow in the eye of Satan, that I'm not afraid of my libido. You know what? You can put me in a fraternity party or a drunkenness or a brothel or I don't know, wherever Satan has his most sway, and I will be okay. And that's well and good. And dads, get your boys married at a young age. Don't leave them. Don't leave them to be in a place where they have to exercise their strong ability to resist their urges by boasting at Satan and so forth. Okay. Again, same expression. Here it's sexual. The previous one of the things that I like about the Palemu text is it's not sexual, but here it's again for everybody else. Palemu is a saint. Everybody else, it's a sexual thing, and don't boast that I would never. It could never happen to me. Satan would never have sway over me. So get them married young, and somehow, there are these naive moments or blind spots in the tradition. Somehow getting married is protection against men acting licentiously. Like were it only true that was the case, but that's the naive assumption of the Kedushin text. Pretty good? All right. Next one is in our prayer book, and it comes right out of there, and it's mostly here just to be able to highlight it. Very early on, this is in the 9:30 to 9:35 window. It's good. We never say it out loud, so I won't make Marvin, lead us in Psukei Zimra at the moment and say it out loud. But in the name of Yehuda Nasi, Yirat Somil Fanecha Nailoinu V'Le'avatenu, Shetatzilenu Me'azei Panim U'Me'azut Panim, Me'adam Ra U'Mepega Ra, Mi'yetzer Ra, Bechaver Ra, Mi'Shachen Ra U'Misatan HaMashchit, U'Midin Kasher U'Mibal Din Kasher, Bein Shehu Bein Brit, Bein She'eno Bein Brut. May it be your will, Lord our God and God of our ancestors, that you save us from the arrogant and from arrogance, from a bad man, from a bad mishap, from an evil instinct. That's the Yetzer Hara. From a bad companion, from a bad neighbor. Again, all these bads are evil. From the destructive Satan, from a harsh trial, from a harsh opponent, whether he's a Jew or not a Jew. So that every day, in the morning prayer, we kind of pray to be saved from Satan. Now, I didn't bring it here because it must be the Talmud somewhere, actually. I'd have to look for it. But the Hashkivenu prayer also has Satan mentioned in it. Hashkivenu an Eloheinu l'shalom, v'amidenu makein l'chaim, ufros aleinu zkar shlomecha, v'takdein beitzat tova milfanecha, v'hoshienu l'man shemecha, v'agein be'adenu, mikol tzara v'tzukah, mikol nego machala, blah, 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 whatever it is, but from every Satan that is there. It's every night. So we pray for strength against Satan in the morning, which is there in the Talmud, and in the evening, and that also has to be in the Talmud. And, next time I teach this material, I'll have to find the Talmudic text. I guarantee you it's in Brachot, and it wouldn't be hard to find. And if anybody wants me to after class tonight, I'm happy to look it up. But I'm confident. Oh, I shouldn't be so confident. That sounds a little bit like an arrow in the eye of Satan. But I actually do think that it is there, and I do think that I'm competent to find it. And I apologize for being mildly boastful. And again, I apologize that I didn't turn down the text. So here at the bottom of page 7 from Brachot 16b, and it's also in Pesukei de Zimra every morning. Good. I like that idea. And it's tied into the Polemo piece because that's what Satan says to Polemo, what Polemo should say, instead of saying Satan has no power over me, an arrow in the eye of Satan. You should say, God, help take care of Satan. And so we actually every morning say, God, help take care of Satan. And every evening we say, God, help take care of Satan. So it's like the fulfillment, I think, of what, maybe it's kind of a fun twist, but Satan says to Polemo, you should pray that God will take care of me. And so the Jews pray that God will take care of Satan. Almost, can I give Satan credit for some of the prayer book? It's a bit of a stretch, but I like it. All right, Roman numeral 13.
Satan has a really odd relationship with God. He's not always an antagonist, sometimes he's
Well, and I'm not sure.
fascinating.
Do we have a text? Have we seen a text in which Satan is an antagonist of God? Right? Satan does, the Jobin text, Satan does say, we're going to come back to those texts in the Midrash. Satan does say, pushes God or has a debate with, I don't know exactly what the right expression is, but I'm not sure he antagonizes God, right? He challenges God's ideas a bit. I'll take challenges. Go back to Job. Again, we'll get to Job. I don't know that we'll do it tonight, but we will get to Job in the Midrashic text.
Right.
All right, Adam. Yep.
I just have a comment. By Satan asking to pray for him, he acknowledges that he needs help and that God is greater than him and he can help him, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that I think both the functional tradition that in the morning we pray for God to help us, protect us from Satan. In the evening we pray, again, for Jewish Satan in the context of all the other dangers in this world. That includes, a bad judge, mean Jews and mean non-Jews, and all the other things that are in this list from Brachot 16 or from the prayer book. But that Satan makes that list of things that could cause us to stumble or err. And therefore we pray to God to strengthen us that won't happen in the morning and in the evening. All right, I had to get in one Yerushalmi text just because they're two Talmuds, and I called it Satan in the Talmud, so got to show Satan in both Talmuds. And it is, it's right there. Part of it, I think what the text is getting at is there are a set of things where we don't want to delay because a delay could cause us to muck it up in some way. So that's the wash our hands and don't talk. The next words out of our mouth are supposed to be Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, okay, which is here, right? That's the middle example. For anyone who immediately pronounces the blessing that is, after washing his hands, Satan will not find anything to accuse him about at the meal. And for anybody who immediately prays after mentioning redemption, that is the last line that we say before we do the Amidah is Gaal Yisrael. Okay, it's not true in Mincha, but it's true in Shacharit and in Mariv. The blessing that's the end of the Shema stuff, right before we do the Amidah, is a blessing for Geulah, a blessing for redemption. And it's a tradition that, like washing hands and going right to Motzi, that you'll notice Rabbi Kaplan is more machmir. She's more observant of that tradition than I am, because on Friday nights we do the blessing. It comes after Micha Mocha and so forth, and then I say in the evenings the Amidah is recited silently, beginning on page 47, continuing through the page 52. When you are finished, please be seated, or something along those lines. And Rabbi Kaplan does that before she concludes the previous prayer. So she is more observant of the tradition. It's one of those that I say, you know what, shoot an arrow in Satan's eye. I'll be all right. So I should probably be more protective of myself in our sacred space and be more like Rabbi Kaplan. But literally, that's the tradition, right? That because redemption, or say it differently, our saying the Amidah should be linked to our prayer for redemption, and that will bring redemption. So what kind of idiot would muck that up? But similarly, the connections of things. So this is, I think, truly a halakha l'maaseh, a rule about the way we behave and act, that and one that many of us know and observe either fully or mildly. That is, wash your hands, al netilat yadayim, and maybe sing a little bit, but don't talk until we get to Motzi. And that is the similar, from the eyes of the tradition, perspective on why Rabbi Kaplan is a better rabbi than I am, at least in the evening service and in the morning service, for making that announcement where she makes it rather than where I do. Does that make sense? I think that stuff's fun and neat. An example of, how these things influence how we lead services and what we think. Again, I don't know that Rabbi Kaplan is more observant in that moment because specifically she wants to make sure that Satan will have no influence over her or the community, or just because she knows it's the right way to do it. I am a fan of the shoot an arrow in the eye of Satan sometimes. I'm just saying. Thoughts, comments, or questions? I'm going to sneeze.
Rabbi, I suppose it's not really a Tanakh or really a Torah thing, but is the word for arrow the same one in Hebrew every time? Like, is it the same vehicle, I guess? Sorry, that's a bit of work.
Yeah, this is it right here. I don't know, I'm having some cursor problem in terms of my thing, but so that is not the biblical word for arrow. That's an Aramaic word that if you want to, I'm not going to jump down the rabbit hole now a little bit after 8 o'clock, but I'm happy once I say class is over and I turn off the recording. Anybody wants to say it's not a private moment, but I'm happy to jump down that rabbit hole a little bit and show you how I would jump down that rabbit hole if you'd like to see it. Okay.
Thank you. Sounds
but
good.
I'm gonna resist now and keep plowing forward.
Sounds good.
Okay. It doesn't give the reference. I think it's in Parshat Mishpatim, and I think it appears multiple times. Vet chukotai tishmeru, that you will observe all of my chukim, all of my laws or statutes or whatever else. And here's a comment in the Talmud from Yoma, Dvarim shasatan mishiv alehen, that this thing that you will keep all of my statute is specifically referring to those rules that Satan could challenge you about. That you really have to observe them or keep them or whatever. And the Talmud understands that these are the mitzvot, literally the chukim, that we don't know why we do them, right? And so they are achilat chazir, ולבישת שעטנז, וחליצת יבמה, וטהרת מצורע, ושעיר המשתלח, right? These things that are eating pig, wearing inappropriate mixtures of flax and wool, chalitza, the way we do divorce, with worried about the remarried side, the whole brother-in-law thing, having to do with the treatment of a leper, and having to do with the sending a goat out on Yom Kippur. And so, Vishema Tomar Maaseh Tohuhem, lest you think that these are meaningless, random acts, Talmud Lomar, the Torah teaches us, Ani Adonai, that the reason why Et chukotai tishmaru, these are, you should observe my chukoti, my laws or my statutes, is because I am God. Ani Adonai chakachtiv, I am God who said you need to do these. Ve'en lecha reshut leharher bahen, and you have no opportunity to question them. Okay, so it is a statement in Yoma about that there are things that we do because God told us to do them. That's it. Don't question it. And these specific things are tied into, they each have like a little opening, just enough for that Satan crowbar to pry open doubt in your head. Because like, really, why the pig? And you know this because people all the time, people have explained, that trichinosis in the ancient world, or that the pig is a nasty one of the animals. I'm going to look at it. There's a midrashic text that we'll look at where the pig is a nasty animal that like sleeps in its urine and it's just gross, But all those are explanations that aren't in the Torah. The Torah says you will observe my statutes. Don't eat pig. I am God. Like boom. And so, that is, that's just begging Satan to say, come on, man. You've walked down past a restaurant and smelled bacon. You've seen all of those pretty pictures of the family gathered around the table eating the cherry smoked or roasted or whatever it is that honey baked ham sells, or right? Come on. What does it matter? You're eating cow. Like, at least the vegetarian I won't give a hard time to, but you're already killing animals to eat. Why not kill the tasty one? You know what I'm saying? And the answer is because I am the Lord your God, or I am God. So here is an understanding that that Satan's looking for an in to try and reason with you or argue with you about why you should misbehave. And we've done, different than when Satan becomes a naked lady, or when Satan conspires so that David will see naked Bathsheba, or, where Satan dresses up like a beggar to tempt Polemu. Here, Satan just comes right at you and says, come on, this is of the same ilk as the snake in the garden saying, come on, God didn't really say if you touch it, you're going to die. Come on, God knows. God's afraid you're going to eat it. That voice of logic, or, very different kind of temptation than otherwise. Yeah? Okay, let's the important part of why I have this text from Megillah up there is that it's a messianic text. It is bringing the book of Daniel into the story of Babylon, of Persia, of Esther, which is brilliant on many levels, because that is a better fit for where that story belongs rather than in Babylon, where it is set. And it's having to do with calculating the years based on the prophecy in Daniel until God will redeem the world, until the Messiah will come. Maybe this will make it into the Messiah series or not. I know, Lynn, that it wasn't that long ago, a week or two, that you did the calculating the Messiah texts in Sanhedrin, right? Great stuff. That'll definitely be part of the Messiah class or series. But that's what this is about. This is about calculating, and it's really, really hard, and it's complicated, and it's symbolic language. I don't think the math itself is so difficult. But because they calculate it in a way, and this is the fear of why you don't calculate the date of the coming of the Messiah, because if that date comes and the world's not redeemed, then everybody says, this is all wrong, and there is no Messiah, or God doesn't predict the Messiah, or it was 15 years ago or something that church in Florida calculated the date for the return of Jesus, I think based on the Mayan calendar, which I never really understood, but they had a date. It was May something and 2000 and something, and I could find it online. I don't remember their names. And like the day came and went. It was another Thursday or whatever the date was. And so, to their faithful followers, they have to have some explanation for why the Messiah tarries. And for everybody else, it was just proof of the narishkeit, of the nonsense. So the Talmud says, don't try to calculate the coming of the Messiah. The Messiah will come. And when the Messiah comes, we'll all sing hallelujah. But don't predict the date. So here, they try to predict the date. And there's a question of doing it. And because it doesn't work, be a little simplistic and not go through it, this is the part that I like. Satan comes, Basatan, v'riked benehen, and starts dancing among them. And that's what killed Vashti. So the whole question of, does Vashti die? The whole this, the whole that, the whole other thing. But the whole problem around the Vashti text is about calculating the Messiah. And it's the presence of Satan, that the dancing, it's a terrible dancer, the dancing of Satan that causes them to lose control and to do bad things and. But Satan's only is able to come and celebrate because of their miscalculation. Okay. Makes some sense. Again, the piece that I like is they mess up. Here, Satan doesn't tempt them. They mess up. And then Satan comes to celebrate it, and that just makes it worse. It's like giving Satan that opening already. And I don't know exactly what to do with the death of Vashti as a part of it, to be honest. But it's there.
It's like the secret hand of God in Purim, in a way. Here, Satan's like the agent of
yes, but neat.
Of the Purim story. So
right, because Vashti has to get out of the way.
Yes.
Oh, that's fascinating. So this story, rather than being here in the Talmud, I think it's a story about how we messed up. But in this case, were it not for that mess up, then, so we're going to get to, not tonight, not by a long shot, but we're going to get to an extended midrash about Satan and Purim. That's outstanding. And remember this text. I haven't put them together in my head, but maybe by May 1st, I will put them together because we're not going to get that far tonight. The next text also appears in more fully in the Midrash. Here it's from the Talmud, which is why it's here. But the thing that I like about it, and we're going to see more of this in the Midrashic literature, some of it is later than the Talmudic literature, and it doesn't all come from Babylon. So it's more in a Christian world, and we'll see that in the Midrash. Is expressions that we know from a Christian world that we don't think of them as so Jewish. In this story, Satan is arguing with Abraham about going to sacrifice his son. Okay, and you can read through all of it. In the middle of the paragraph on the top of page 10, Satan says, look, right? Because Abraham's not believing him and resisting him and so forth. Satan says, look, I heard them whispering up in heaven. A quote from Job, a word was secretly brought to me, and my ear received a whisper thereof. Okay, so Satan is fulfilling something that was said in Job, but speaking to Abraham. There's a fun tie, there's multiple fun ties between Job and Abraham, but that'll have to wait. And Satan says, I heard something from the other side of the Pargod, from the world above. I heard that you're not actually going to kill Isaac, that you're actually going to kill a sheep. Right? That's what I heard, which we know is actually what happens. And Abraham says, look, you are a liar. So even if you speak the truth, nobody listens to you. Right? So I don't know, does that mean that Abraham knows? And, kind of Kierkegaard, Abraham knows that God's not going to let him kill his son. And so he knows that Satan is now telling the truth. Or if that's just a standard line that says, maybe you are telling the truth this time, but I'm never going to believe you because, that's the cool thing about liars. If a liar lied every single time, that would actually be much better than the inconsistency of sometimes telling the truth and sometimes lying, right? The thing that I like about this text is Satan quotes scripture. The whole beware of the devil quoting scripture, or the devil can quote scripture, or whatever that line is that I hear in movies with some regularity. Satan quotes from Job multiple times throughout this text in doing it. And I don't know, that strikes me as such a non-Jewish expression to say that, beware the devil quoting scripture, or however the idiom works. And here I got a classic midrash in the Talmud where Satan quotes scripture. And the retort to Satan quoting scripture in the end is, look, liars lie. So even when they tell the truth, they're still liars, and you can't, so, Satan is problematic even when quoting scriptures. So I like that. Pretty good. We'll return to this midrash motif when we do the section specifically on midrash. So I had to make a decision of where to put Roman numeral 17, which is related to a story where they rescue, I forget the number. The number is in the Talmud, but I don't think it's in the paragraph that I've given you. They rescued some number of young women who were being held captive, and they brought them back. But when they brought them back, they had to protect the women. So they put them in a tower so that they're saved, not from the people who kidnapped them and held them captive, but from the rescuers, from the Jews themselves. And so it's a text again about temptation and sexual temptation. It uses the line from the Cain and Abel story that sin lies in wait at the door. But in this conversation telling the story about the virgins of Nardea, the question is asked, what did Satan say at that moment? And Elijah the prophet responds that on Yom Kippur, Satan has no power. That's the part that I want to highlight, but I had to give you a little bit of the context. And if you're curious, you can go back and read more about the virgins rescued in Nardea. And so here's this idea that Satan can do all the Satan-y stuff, but not on Yom Kippur. And what's the proof text for it? Well, the numerical equivalent of Hasatan, He, Sin, Tet, Nun, 5, 300, 9, 50 is 364. So that's the proof that Hasatan, and it even says it here, Hasatan b'gematria talat mea ushitin v'arba have. That the word hasatan, you need the hay in there to make the numbers work. In gematria, that is using letters, using the numerical equivalent of letters, is 364. Okay, 364 days. That is missing one day that Satan has no power or no authority to over human beings, no license to prosecute in their language. So it turns out that day is Yom Kippur, which is pretty nice, but not Erev Yom Kippur, as we saw in the Palume text or Palemu text, right? But I don't know. Kind of fun, little piece of gematria in the Talmud, linked up to the years. Be careful in leap years. Leap years, Satan actually has 2 days where Satan has the day off. I don't know. Don't be careful. You can be less careful in leap year, I guess. I had that backwards. Lynn, you look like you want to say something?
Oh, I was just thinking it wasn't yet Erev Yom Kippur because they were eating.
Right.
So maybe the whole day still stays intact.
Correct. So it's interesting in terms of how we use expressions. But generally, if I were to say Erev Yom Kippur, I mean that night. Like if I were to say Erev Pesach right now, I would probably be implying Saturday night. But Erev Pesach is actually Saturday this year. Erev Yom Kippur is the 9th of Tishrei. It's not just Kol Nidre. That's the evening. But when we say, and so it's just important in terms of how expressions are used and what they mean. Tying in this text to the next text, it seems relevant to me that related to Satan, the Talmud uses gematria. So gematria that will be a tool for all kinds of later mysticism, looking at the numerical equivalencies to be able to talk. And Satan will be important later mysticisms. That was 17. And here in 18, we have another kind of mysticism called Atabash, which is a form of, you know what initials are or what an acronym is, where you just take the first letters of things along the way and so forth. But there are other forms of coded readings. One of the classic is what's called Atabash, where it's the first letter and the last letter, Aleph Taf. And then it's the second letter and the penultimate letter. It's the Bet and the Shin. And then it's the third letter and the third from the end letter. And the fourth, and you go in that you pair off the letters going in this way. So all kinds of stuff around cryptography. In a fictional account, a book that plays with some of these ideas is Umberto Eco's Foucault's Pendulum. But this is a classic form of cryptic reading, where instead of reading the way the words are written, you see the words as symbolic. We sing Ana B'Koach on Friday nights before Lecha Dodi. So there are 42 words in it. And the poem, Ana B'Koach, is taken to be an act. If you take the first letter of each of the 42 words, it's taken to be one of the mystical names of God. Okay, and then those words actually are used in 7 combinations of 6. It's also done as 14 combinations of 3. People do all kinds of mystical rearranging of the letters there. But so one of them is Atabash, which is here in this text. And so by doing that, it says that, related to what comes before in the Talmud, I'm not so concerned, but as a virtue of the righteous ones, you have this idea of Aleph Taf Bet Shin, this kind of mystical reading, so that Im ata bosh. So ata, aleph taf, bush or bosh, bet shin. If you are embarrassed, then gimel resh, dalet kuf. Again, first and last letter, second and penultimate letter. Right? You could look at the alphabet and see that they've got their letters right. So atabush, if you are shameful or if you are shamed, ger dak. You will live. Imata, you will live. Imata osekein. If you do that, if you have the humility or whatnot to be bashful or gur bedok, you will live up in the heavens. Hey tzadi vav pei chatzitza chave bencha laaf. Then there will be chatzitza, there will be a separation between you and anger. So do you see what they're doing? They are taking the first and last letter, the second and penultimate letter, and saying that's two words, atabosh. And then they're doing the third letter and the three from the end letter, ger, and the dal and the kuf, dak, bidak. You will, if you are modest, I might be better English, then you will live in the heavens. And if you do that, then take the fifth letter and the fifth from the end and the sixth letter and the sixth from the end, and you get chetz vaf, chatzitza have bencha la'af. Then you will make a separation with your anger. Keep going, seventh letter to the seventh from the end, eighth letter to the eighth from the end, ninth letter to the ninth from the end, and you have zea chas tan ve'ena ta miz das zea min hasatan. Then you will not be knocked around by the Satan. Okay, Yud Mem Kaf Lamed, continuing all the way. Now we've done the entire alphabet. Right? Chet, Tet, Yud, Chaf, Lamed, Mem, the whole alphabet. Yud Mem Kaf Lamed, Amar Sar Shel Gehenom Lifnei Kadosh Baruch Hu Ribono Shel Olam Layam Kol. Then the minister of Gehenna, of hell, said before the Holy Blessed One, Master of the universe, send the righteous as well into the sea, to which all go. That is Gehenna. So, one, here is an example of a mystical style of reading, a form of cryptography called atabash in the tradition, and it is a mystical reading that really revolves around Satan, right? I think the important part of this teaching related to the righteous is what comes up at the end. That if you are righteous, then this will be your lot in this world. You will be protected from Satan, even though Satan says, throw them all into the sea. You know, a text one doesn't usually look at. Are we good? Any questions or comment on that?
Satan is the minister of Gehenna in this text.
So Satan appears. He is the samech word. You'll see that it's one of those places in terms of oral versus written tradition. The sin and the samech play games because Satan is never written with a samech, but here they get away with it because they can, because they're doing the letter rearranging. So Satan is explicit in the zayin ayin, chet samech, tet nun, ve'enata mizdazea, mina satan. You will not be thrown off balance from the Satan. And then in the next piece, they refer to Satan as the Sar Shel Gehenom, as the minister of hell, which is pretty good. You know, it's pretty devilish. It's pretty Hades-ish. You know, again, not an idiom that we often see in Judaism, but right here in the Talmud, I didn't make this one up. One of the earliest examples of cryptographic reading of Atabash, and here used as praise for the righteous, but in the context showing that Satan has no power over them. So, especially in using kind of a mystical methodology or here cryptographic methodology as being related to, irrelevant to Satan. Pretty good? Now, the next one is going to give us the expression, right? here. Le'olam al yiftach adam piv lesatan. Therefore, a person should never open their mouth to Satan. I haven't even given you the context for the teaching in the name of Abaye. Also in the name of Shimon ben Lakish and Rabbi Yossi. This idea that it is in some ways, a related idiom to shoot an arrow. To the person who would say, I shoot an arrow in the eye of Satan, you should respond and say, don't ever open your mouth to Satan, which is some kind of don't give Satan an opening or an invitation or some such. And so it's an idiom still used today, for those who get tired of spitting over their shoulder and saying tfu, tfu, tfu all the time. When I rebuke my children for counting their blessings or for self-aggrandizing, for complimenting how great they are, I will say to them, Al tiftach pele satan. Like, no, Dad, I'm a really good driver. Al tiftach pele satan. Don't do that. Don't tell me you're a really good driver. Tell me you're trying hard. Tell me you will never lose focus. Don't tell me that you're a really good driver because you're just begging for Satan to appear as a naked person standing on your dashboard. No, I'm telling you, officer, the accident wasn't my fault. There was this naked person standing on my dashboard in front of the car, climbed up a tree, crossed the river.
There's a similar expression, Kneged Ayin Hora.
Yes. So there is about resisting or avoiding the evil eye. So it's not exactly the same, because the focus of the idiom, of the expression, is on the other side. So I shouldn't open my mouth to Satan, but the evil eye comment isn't that I have the evil eye. It's that by opening my mouth to Satan, I invite the evil eye to look at me.
Yes.
Right? That's the Sauron, all-seeing eye that you don't want to see you. So, tfu, keep it quiet. Don't do anything boastful that will attract the attention of the evil eye. Again, the next text is the same text I just wanted to show you multiple times. The don't open your mouth to Satan. I want to highlight in 21 on the bottom of page 12 that there is, a way to say what you want to say for the superstitious amongst us. And by superstitious, I mean the wise and saintly and smart ones, to avoid saying things. And so it's kind of like the Jewish logic or Jewish math. I don't know. There used to be a reader, right? Didn't the Reader go out of business and they don't publish it in print anymore? There used to be the Reader. There used to be in the Reader a column called Sheeps and Goats. And it was like a restaurant review guy, but instead of a restaurant critic, but instead of going to restaurants, they went to houses of worship. And they wrote a review of them, not dissimilar from the way a restaurant critic would write a restaurant review. And they came to Or Shalom. And at one point, one Shabbos morning at like 9:20, 9:25, somebody I've never seen before is walking through our sanctuary and like suddenly taking some pictures of the stained glass and of the ark. And I walked up to them and I said, lovely to have you. I'm Rabbi Meltzer. You're more than welcome here, but it's our custom if you would put your camera away to not take pictures in honor of the Sabbath. And they said, and I forgot the person's name, but I write Sheeps and Goats. And I said, oh, crud. That's the beginning of the review of my synagogue. The rabbi wouldn't let me take pictures on Shabbos. That's how he did. And he wrote a lovely review. I wonder if we can dig up a copy of it somewhere. I must have it in a file somewhere. It was really, really funny. But one of them, they went to, I think it was Rabbi Hollander, who was doing what was then, what they call it, the Kollel of Del Cerro, whatever it was that met by the the donut shop on the corner of Navajo and not
It became
Wandam.
Young Israel.
It became Young
became
Israel,
Young
right? But it was before it was Young Israel, I think. Anyway, so he came to a bris, I think, that was there, and wrote about it. And one of the he's interviewing, I think it's Rabbi Hollander, who's such a beautiful match. And he said to him, "How many grandkids do you have?" And he said something like, I mean, like I don't have 11, or I don't quite have 11, or I don't. And the guy didn't understand. He said, "No, I didn't ask you how many you don't have. How many do you have?" And Rabbi Hollander couldn't say, I have, because tfu tfu tfu, bli ayin hara, ginahara, al tiftach pele satan. You don't count those things, right? And so it was like there is exactly that moment lived by somebody in a non-kitschy sort of way, but in a deeply, acculturated to that ethos. And it appeared there in the Reader in a column called Sheep and Goats. And so there's a way to say what you want to say. You just have to say it in a way that doesn't tempt Satan, or it doesn't, shoot an arrow in the eye of Satan, or open your mouth to Satan, or whatever else. So that's what's at stake in this bottom of page 12 about it. I want to highlight, and it's another example of the Al Tiftach Peh Satan. And it's kind of interesting. I've given you more in the Hebrew than I did in the English. And so that's interesting. I don't usually make that mistake. But I want to point that the context of it has to do with alcohol. In a similar way, Satan and sex and sexual temptation, Satan in mysticism. We looked at two different kinds of mysticism that use Satan. We used gematria and atabosh. So Satan associated, or mysticism associated with trying to understand Satan. And here we have an association with Satan and alcohol that we'll come back to in Midrashim about Noach. Right? Noach plants a vineyard. Satan will be there in that vineyard, have no doubt. But that's yet to come. All righty. This is a lovely text. This is a lovely text built around, the idea of peacemaking and people getting along with each other, and it's tied into Shabbat and Shabbat prep. There's the midrash. It's in one of the marginal stories in Sidur Lev Shalem on Friday nights about the good angel and the bad angel that walk around on Friday afternoons in the house where every house, where it's all a disaster and the kids are dirty and the table's not set. Then the good angel is forced to say to the bad angel something like, "May every Shabbat be like this." And when they come to a house where the table is set and the children are washed and the chicken is cooked and whatnot, then the bad angel is forced to bless the good angel and say, "May all Shabbatot be like this," whatever the exact text is. But I can find it, but it's in the marginalia, I think in the Friday night service, probably on the Lechad Dodi page or the Shalom. It must be on the Shalom Aleichem page because it has to do with angels. That's page 5. Lynn's pulling out her Sidur Lev Shalem. Let's see how I'm doing. You read the same story every Friday night, year after year. Page 5. I think it's in the leftmost column on the English side, not in the rightmost. Let's see how I do in terms of picturing that page. But so that is in the genre of text number 22 from Gittin, where the story is told about two people who aren't named. Just in terms of literary observation, they are functional in the story. They're not individuals in the story. But there are two people who fight every Friday afternoon. Am I right, Lynn, or no? Is it on page 5? And why isn't my Sidur Sim Shalom next to my desk?
It says that it talks about Sholem Aleichem. It talks about angels who accompany people on Shabbat from the synagogue to their home and then bless those observing the day. But that's not what you're talking about.
But is it a good angel, bad angel motif?
No, it's just an angel who comes home with you.
Gosh darn it. All right, I'll have to find it. Everybody come to choir tomorrow night for services, and I'll have the text for tomorrow night. I'm not going to find it now. But so uh, Roman numeral 22 on the top of page 13. Two people who are arguing, and the text gives you the sense that Satan plays a role in it. You know, Satan like pokes one of them in the back of the head, and the other guy gets blamed for it, or eats half of his lunch, and the other guy gets blamed for it, or whatever it is that makes it such that Satan causes this rift, this argument between them, this reeve, every Friday, right before Shabbos. And then Rabbi Meir happens to come upon them and discovers that these two guys don't get along on Friday afternoons. And so he, however he does it, he speaks lovingly to them and patiently to them, and he talks them off of the cliff, off of the conflict. And he does that multiple weeks in a row until finally, ad avar lehushlama, until he gets a sense of peace, or, between the two of them. He makes agreement between the two of them. And after he does that, he hears Satan say, damn it. That's my new favorite expression. Satan saying that, because of what he's done, I no longer get to be here for Shabbos, right? Rabbi Meir sort of gets him uninvited or unwelcome in the house. What I think I love about the text is this idea that there are forces that create conflict, but there are also forces that negate conflict or create, agreement or friendship. And that, some of the forces creating conflict are beyond our control. Let's call that Satan. But there's a possibility to be Rabbi Meir. There's a possibility to help people to get along, because sometimes, just like people have something pushes them to conflict, we can also push lovingly towards agreement and peace. And I think that's a lovely, lovely text. And I really think it's a lovely, lovely text and model to understand, there are people who just don't get along. So how do we help those people get along? Because there seems to be some other force that is keeping them stuck in that space of not getting along. Yeah? A neat little, again, it's a Misa. It's not, I don't think Rabbi Meir ever did that. This isn't like a historical piece. It's not a story that his children said about him in his eulogy, but it's a lovely teaching, I think. I find it a lovely teaching. On the other side of it, we're not going to spend time with it, but you all have it. Text 23 is that is a statement about how we look at people or how we view people, and having to do with the way somebody rules. I think about in the way we dehumanize and speak badly about people who we disagree with. And he says, "Ach katan yeshli, b'chor satan hu." I have a little brother, and he is the spawn of Satan. That's just, I love. Like, I know people who say that about their younger brother. And here the issue is about disagreement and whatever else. This is kind of the antithesis. I should have put them in the opposite order. This is like the text that I really, really like because I really, really hate it. It's just awful. But I get it because that's the way. And it doesn't just stop there. Katan achatan yeshli, b'chor satan hu. I have a little brother. He is the spawn of Satan. V'yonatan shemo, and his name is Jonathan. V'hu mitalmidei Shammai. Yeah, he's a student of Shammai. Like, he went to Yale. He's a Republican. I don't know. It's awful. So I love this text because it's awful. It's on the other side of it. And then the last text in this section, and I'll introduce the Midrash packet, but clearly we're not going to learn any of the Midrashim tonight. The last one which somehow 14 comes after 22. And apparently 22, 23, and 14. This is nice. You know, I can proofread while I teach. Also from the Yerushalmi. It's a great, great text. Amar Rabbi Levi. Rabbi Levi taught, Bishlosha mekomot hasatan matsui lekatreg. There are three places where Satan lurks in order to tempt or incite or accuse or whatever it is that Satan does. Three places. Hamehalech b'derech be'atzmo. One of the places is the person who walks alone. Ve'ayeshen b'bayit afer le'atzmo. Another one is somebody who sleeps in a dark house all by themselves. Ve'amefores bayam hagadol. And one who sets out, I would say seemingly on his own, on the ocean. And what I love, and the reason why the Talmudic stuff ends here, because the way I introduced it in the beginning of the last class, and I wrapped up the last class, is I think that Satan's stories are functional. I think that there are ways of engaging the nature of the world and making it better, even if it just gives us a story to tell or makes us chuckle or it brings us comfort. And that this text in the name of Rabbi Levi acknowledges that there are dangerous places for people, places where they get themselves in trouble. No. They don't get themselves in trouble. Places where they are susceptible to Satan getting them in trouble. That's what I meant to say. But there are places that as individuals, we should be aware when we get into those dark places. And as a community, we should be aware of people who could find themselves where they're isolated. The traveler who's all by themselves, where they're isolated. Person who's sleeping in a dark place all alone, somehow fearful, somehow, alienated. And the one who's really on a journey, a scary, dangerous journey without support and so forth. I think it's a great, great text that there are dangerous places. Like it's easy to do the way I would do it if I was starting off a horror film and it started in a church, because no rabbi ever talks this way. But and there are places where Satan lurks and you need to be careful. But I don't tend to read things that way because it just makes me chuckle. But there are places where Satan lurks. There are places where people are susceptible for getting themselves into trouble. And as individuals, we need to be mindful of those places and when we find ourselves there. And as a community, right, we need to be aware for others, for our friends, for our family, for the people in the pew across from us, for people within our community. If we fear that they may be in one of those places of danger, in terms of how, sort of Olive Rabbi Meir, how we're able to come to their aid and get them a nightlight if they sleep alone in the dark, or make it so they don't have to travel alone. Walk with them or help them, or anyway. I find it a deep truth for all of the ways in which the stories of Satan make me chuckle, and all the ways in which I have talked about them as fictional narrative. They are also deep truths. And I think that this last text really is a deep truth, and one that we should take to heart and be conscious of. Okay, it only took me 2 sessions to get through the Talmudic material, and only by going 2 hours in the first session and an hour and 45 minutes in the second session. So I think I did time management and planning out the lesson very, very, very well. I'm very impressed. Any comments or questions or reactions to either specific texts or the ideas presented in the piece on Satan in the Talmud, or the Satan of the Talmud? Yeah, Lynn?
It occurs to me how ungrand he is, how close to people, how down to earth, how much he fits in the little spaces in our lives, and how I guess how you can be charmed by him in so many ways. But not a great guy with a big S, just right in there somewhere with us.
Scarier or not scarier for that?
Good question. Good question.
He's not the boogeyman, you know?
Yeah.
Nice. I think that's really true. I think that's
Yeah.
really true in terms of the frame of where Satan fits into the kind of a Jewish cosmology. Is he's not the scary beastie. You know, he's not the Leviathan or the giant serpent or or the master demon of hell who will punish you for he's actually somebody much more real.
Yeah.
Nice. I like that a lot, Lynn. Other thoughts or comments?
It seems that by the time of the Talmud, what's the third century, that the concept of Satan as an actual personality is deep, because we started in the beginning where it was like a place and a verb in the Psalm stuff. Is that going to change? I don't want to okay.
Yep. Everything's going to change. And well, I'll come to my introduction of the next unit in a minute. Let me see who else wants to comment or question or react either to Satan in the Talmud or to a specific text or to, getting through 3 pieces of this, even if it took 4 sessions. All right. Yeah, I think I've said it multiple times. And if you haven't heard me say it, you can listen to the recordings and you'll hear that I've said it multiple times. One, I think Satan is a functional character. And I think that in some ways it's why Lynn's comment really resonates. I think that it's a relatable character and it's one that fits into the world as we live rather than being, some great mythic, so forth. And I think that ideas of Satan, and just true of ideas in general, evolve over time. And I am just personally, intellectually, and that has spiritual implications or ramifications, I am fascinated by being able to map out or track out how ideas have evolved over time. And it gives us license to not be locked into the way our teachers taught these things to us, because they were a little bit different than the way their teachers taught, and a little bit different, and therefore quite a bit different than the way Moses heard it on the top of Mount Sinai, so to speak. And Satan becomes a neat example of that. And now it's not as clean as I map it out to be, but I want to make the point. And so, if there were 97 references to Satan in the Talmud, I only gave you 24 of them, right? And so I think it's over 600 references to Satan in the Midrash that I found. And so and many of them parallel what we've seen so far. And what I've decided to do in these 14 pages, and it's not 100%, but I'll explain why it's not 100%. On Thursday night, May 1st, when we at least start this packet, I don't know when we will finish this packet, is I have erred in the direction of long narrative. That there actually are a couple of these that appear better in the Talmud than I presented it to you, because I am manipulating the data. I acknowledge it to make my point. So I'm not 100% correct, but in the broad trend, I think I am, and I'll defend it. And anybody wants to look up any of these pieces, I've given you all you need to do so. But I have favored long narrative from the classic Midrash. Some of them are later than the Talmud, at least later than the generations of Talmudic discourse, even if they're contemporaneous with the editing of the Talmud. In the really good pieces. And it actually works out better this way, I think, because I strongly commend to you that May 1st will be more fun if you've read these. And even better to read them Jewishly rather than reading them, post-Greeks. The Greek tradition says, go sit quietly, contemplatively, and read these. I'm not a big fan of that. Sit with somebody, even if it's not somebody who's going to join you on May 1st, and read through them and enjoy them, play with them, ask questions, take notes, read them more than once, maybe read them once on your own. So then when you read them with somebody else, many of them make a little bit more sense if you read them twice or 3 times. But, prepare for May 1st, and I've given you this packet, and I've erred in the direction of long narrative midrashim related to Satan. And I've given at least a little piece of it in terms of the devil's quoting scripture. I'm interested in where ideas that I think of as Christian ideas related to Satan appear in the Midrash. And I don't know enough, but now I got a month. Maybe I'll do more research. I wonder if Lou Barth is still doing Midrash stuff, or call some of the people that I know who are just smarter than I am, as to whether or not that is, presumed to be interchange between the communities, or presumed to be reaction to living very similar lives and having similar kinds of ideas and having the same generative seed that they develop along similar paths, which is an idea I trace out and play with in my Judaism, Christianity, and Islam class at State. So it's kind of a fun idea, and it's a fun idea to think about, even if we don't know for sure the answer. Okay? So with that being said, first, I'm going to say thank you very much for a lovely evening that still went for 2 hours.